I still need you. The woman standing in the rain outside Malcolm Reed's door was the same woman who had approved his resignation weeks earlier. Jessie Carter, CEO of Next Gen Systems, was not the kind of person who showed up at anyone's door. To understand why we have to go back. The alarm went off at 5:15, the same as every morning. Malcolm Reed silenced it before the second ring, a reflex carved into his body over 8 years of single fatherhood. Down the hall, his son Eli was still asleep, one arm dangling off the bed, a math workbook open on his chest. Malcolm stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the boy breathe. Eli was 10 now, tall for his age, quiet in the way kids become when they learn early that one parent has to do the job of two. He never complained when Malcolm missed dinner. He never asked why his mother was not around. But sometimes, late at night, Malcolm would find him sitting on the kitchen floor, with the lights off, not crying, just sitting. And that silence said more than any question ever could. Malcolm closed the door gently, then moved through the narrow hallway to the kitchen. Coffee first, lunch packed, backpack checked, permission slip signed. These were the rituals that held his world together, small and sacred, and he performed them with the discipline of a man who knew that if he stopped, everything would unravel. By 6:30, he was dressed navy suit, clean shave leather bag over one shoulder, and Eli was at the kitchen table eating cereal. "You got practice today?" Malcolm asked. "Coach moved it to Thursday." "I'll be there Thursday then." Eli looked up. "You said that last Thursday, too." The words landed somewhere between Malcolm's ribs. He wanted to say something, an explanation, an apology, a promise he could actually keep, but the phone on the counter was already buzzing. 3 emails, a calendar invite, a message from his deputy board wants the integration timeline moved up, again. "I'll be there," Malcolm said. He kissed the top of his son's head and walked out the door. The commute from the South Side to Next Gen Systems' downtown headquarters took 47 minutes on a good day. Malcolm used the time to review project documents on his tablet, flipping through migration plans and system architecture diagrams with the kind of focus that had made him the youngest department head in the company's history. At 36, he led a team of 12 engineers tasked with building the backbone of every major product Next Gen had launched in the past 3 years. He was good at his job. Everyone said so. What no one said, because no one knew, was how much it cost him. The engagement had ended 4 months ago. Danielle had been patient for 3 years, then less patient, then gone. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because Malcolm had become a man who only existed inside his work, and the version of him that came home at night was a shadow too tired to hold a conversation, let alone a relationship. She had tried to explain this in the letter she left on his nightstand, the one he read once, then folded into the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he never mentioned to anyone. He told himself he was fine. He told his mother he was fine. He told his team he was fine. But fine was a word that had stopped meaning anything a long time ago. At 8:15, Malcolm stepped off the elevator onto the 32nd floor. The office was already alive, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, the low hum of ambition that never quite went silent. He nodded to his team as he passed, stopped to answer 2 questions about the database migration, then settled into his corner office with the door open the way he always kept it. At 9, the company-wide email arrived. It was from Jessie Carter, and it changed everything. Next Gen Systems was acquiring Meridian Technologies, a $700 million deal that would double their market share in enterprise cloud solutions. The integration would be led by Malcolm's department. The timeline was aggressive: 6 months to merge 2 entirely different technology ecosystems into one seamless platform. The board expected a flawless transition. Jessie expected more. Malcolm read the email twice. Then he closed his laptop and stared out the window at the Chicago skyline, where the morning sun was turning the glass towers into columns of gold. He should have felt excitement. This was the kind of project that built careers, the kind of challenge he had spent a decade preparing for. Instead, he felt the weight of it settle across his shoulders like a second body. He was already working 12-hour days. Eli was already eating dinner alone 3 nights a week. The rings under Malcolm's eyes had become permanent dark crescents that no amount of coffee could erase. And now this. The knock on his door came at 10. Jessie Carter did not knock the way most people knocked. She gave 2 sharp taps and walked in before anyone could answer, not out of rudeness, but because she operated on the assumption that her time and everyone else's was too valuable to waste on formalities. She was 41, sharp-featured, with dark auburn hair she kept pulled back in a low knot. She wore authority the way other people wore cologne. You sensed it before she even spoke. "You read the email," she said. It was not a question. "I read it." "Good. I need you to run point on the entire integration. Not just the technical side, the team structure, the vendor negotiations, the client communication. All of it." Malcolm leaned back in his chair. "That is 3 jobs, Jessie." "I know." She sat down across from him, crossing one leg over the other. "And I know what I am asking. But there is no one else in this building I trust to hold it together." There it was, the thing about Jessie that made her both impossible and extraordinary. She did not flatter. She stated facts. And when she said she trusted Malcolm, it was not a management technique. It was the truth delivered without decoration. "I will need more resources," Malcolm said. "You will have them. And flexibility. I have a son." Something shifted in Jessie's expression. Not pity, not impatience, but recognition. "I know you do," she said quietly. "We will make it work." In those early weeks, she kept her word. Malcolm's schedule was adjusted so he could leave by 6 on Tuesdays and Thursdays for Eli's basketball practice. A senior engineer named Terrence Wyatt was promoted to assist with vendor management. Budget approvals that usually took weeks were signed within days, but the project was a beast. Meridian's systems were older and more tangled than anyone had anticipated. Malcolm's team was working through legacy code that had not been documented in years, trying to bridge it with NextGen's modern infrastructure. Every solution uncovered 2 new problems. Every milestone was a moving target. Malcolm started coming in earlier, leaving later. The Tuesday and Thursday schedule held for 3 weeks before the first exception, then the second. Then it was no longer an exception. It was the norm. Eli stopped asking about practice. The late-night calls started in the 4th week. Malcolm was at his kitchen table at 11 reviewing a server migration report when his phone rang. Jessie's name on the screen. He picked up expecting a question about the Meridian deal. Instead, she asked him how he was doing. Not, "How is the project?" Not, "Where are we on the timeline?" Just, "How are you?" He did not know how to answer. So he told the truth. He was tired. She told him she was tired too. And for 20 minutes, they talked about nothing related to work, about Chicago winters, about Eli's jump shot, about a documentary she had watched alone in her office because she had no one waiting at home. That last detail slipped out, and Jessie corrected herself immediately, steering the conversation back to safer ground. But Malcolm had heard it, and he understood it in a way that surprised him. The calls became a pattern, once a week, then twice, always late, always after the building had emptied and the city had gone quiet. They talked about the project, yes, but also about the things that lived underneath the loneliness of leadership, the weight of decisions no one else could see, the strange grief of succeeding at work while failing at everything else. Malcolm never told anyone about these conversations. Neither did Jessie. They existed in a space that had no name, a connection that was too honest to be professional and too careful to be anything else. But something was breaking. The board meeting was scheduled for a Friday in late October. Malcolm had prepared for 2-week slides, projections, risk assessments, a detailed roadmap for the next phase of integration. His team had rehearsed. The data was solid. He walked into the conference room on the 44th floor feeling for the first time in months that he had a grip on things. He lost it in the first 15 minutes. A board member named Patricia Wells began questioning the timeline not with curiosity, but with the kind of precision designed to expose weakness. She had numbers Malcolm had not seen, projections from Meridian's side that contradicted his own. Malcolm scrambled to respond, pulling up backup data referencing internal reports, but the ground kept shifting beneath him. Jessie sat at the head of the table, watching. She did not intervene. By the time it was over, Malcolm had not failed, not technically. But he had stumbled in front of the people who mattered most, and in a company like NextGen, perception was reality. He sat in his car in the parking garage for 40 minutes afterward, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed a message from Eli's school. He had missed the parent-teacher conference. Again. That night, Malcolm did something he had never done before. He picked Eli up from his grandmother's house. Eli's maternal grandmother, who watched the boy when Malcolm worked late, and instead of driving home, he parked by the lake. They sat on the hood of the car, looking out at the dark water. "Dad," Eli said, "are you okay?" Malcolm looked at his son, this boy who had never asked for much, who had learned to fill silence with patience, who was growing up watching his father disappear into a building every morning and come back a little less each night. "No," Malcolm said, "but I am going to be." The next Monday, he walked into Jessie Carter's office and placed a single sheet of paper on her desk. His resignation. Jessie did not look at the letter immediately. She was standing by the window when Malcolm walked in, her back to the door, a phone pressed to her ear. She held up one finger, a gesture Malcolm had seen 100 times, and finished her call with 2 clipped sentences before turning around. She saw the paper on her desk. She picked it up. She read it once, then set it down with the kind of deliberate care that told Malcolm she was choosing her next words very carefully. "Sit down," she said. "I would rather not." "Malcolm." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, something he had only heard during those late-night calls when the building was empty and neither of them was performing. "Sit down, please." He sat. Jessie moved to the chair across from him, not behind her desk, not in the position of authority she usually occupied. She sat the way she had that first morning when she asked him to lead the integration as an equal face-to-face. "Tell me what you need," she said. "I will reduce your project load by 40%. I will bring in 2 more senior leads from the Atlanta office. I will restructure the reporting chain so you are not carrying every decision on your back." Malcolm listened. Every word she said was reasonable. Every solution she offered was real. He could see it, the version of his life where he stayed, where the hours got lighter, where someone else handled the vendor calls and the board presentations and the late-night system failures. It was possible. Jessie had the power to make it happen, and he believed she would. But that was not the point. "It is not about the workload," Malcolm said. Jessie's jaw tightened. "Then what is it about?" "It is about what I have been trading away to be here. Every day, every year. It is not one project, Jessie. It is the accumulation. My son does not ask me to come to his games anymore. He stopped asking because he learned that asking leads to disappointment. That is not something you fix with a restructured reporting chain." She did not argue. She did not try to reframe it or offer another solution. She just looked at him, and for a moment, Malcolm saw something behind her composure, not anger, not frustration, but a kind of grief he did not expect. "When is your last day?" she asked. 2 weeks from Friday." Jessie nodded, once, then stood and walked back to the window. "I will process it today," she said, her voice returning to the tone Malcolm recognized from all-hands meetings and quarterly reviews. "We will need a transition plan for the Meridian integration. I will have Terrence Wyatt step into an interim role. I will have everything documented by end of week. Thank you, Malcolm." He stood. There was something else in the room. A sentence neither of them was saying, a door neither of them was opening. Malcolm felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, unmistakable, invisible. He walked out. The 2 weeks that followed were the quietest of Malcolm's career at NextGen. He had expected friction pushback from the board questions from his team, maybe even a counteroffer routed through HR. None of it came. Jesse had processed his resignation, cleanly communicated it to the leadership team with the kind of professional brevity that left no room for gossip, and assigned Terrence to shadow Malcolm through the transition. Terrence was a good engineer, methodical, calm, the kind of person who could hold a room without raising his voice. Malcolm spent his mornings walking him through the Meridian architecture, explaining the decisions behind every system, every workaround, every shortcut he had built over the past 3 years. It was like handing over a map to a city only he had navigated, and with each briefing, Malcolm felt a piece of himself detach from the place he had given so much of his life to. What he did not expect was the silence from Jessie. She did not call. Not once. Not the late-night conversations they had fallen into over the past 2 months. Not even a quick message about the transition. When they crossed paths in the hallway or the elevator, she was cordial, professional, exactly the CEO the rest of the company saw every day. She asked about deliverables. She CC'd him on handoff emails. She treated him the way she treated every departing employee, with respect, efficiency, and nothing more. Malcolm told himself this was what he wanted. He was leaving. The boundary was appropriate. Whatever those phone calls had been, whatever had lived in the space between midnight and 1 in the morning when she talked about watching documentaries alone and he talked about sitting by the lake with his son. It did not belong in the fluorescent light of the office. But every evening when he checked his phone before bed, the absence was louder than any notification. On his second-to-last day, Malcolm was packing his office when Terrence knocked on the open door. "You got a minute?" Terrence asked. "For you always." Terrence stepped inside and leaned against the bookshelf, arms folded. "I just want to say I know this was not an easy call, and I know it is none of my business. But the team respects the hell out of you for making it." Malcolm looked up from the box of files on his desk. "They think I'm running." "Some of them, yeah. But the ones who matter, the ones with kids, the ones who have been here long enough to see what this place does to people, they get it." Terrence straightened up. "For what it is worth, I do too." Malcolm extended his hand and Terrence shook it. There was nothing else to say. On his last day, Malcolm walked through the 32nd floor one final time. He said his goodbyes, shook hands, accepted the awkward group card someone had passed around the office. He carried his box to the elevator, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the numbers count down. He did not see Jessie. She was in a board meeting on the 44th floor, the same room where Malcolm had stumbled weeks ago. He knew because her assistant had mentioned it in passing that morning, almost apologetically, as if to explain why the CEO would not be there to see him off. Malcolm stepped into the November air. Chicago was cold and bright, the wind cutting across the river with the kind of sharpness that made your eyes water, whether you wanted them to or not. He put the box in his trunk, sat behind the wheel, and drove south toward home. The feeling he carried was not relief. It was not regret. It was something in between, the hollow lightness of a man who had removed a weight from his shoulders, only to realize he had no idea what to do with his empty hands. The first week was good. Malcolm made breakfast every morning. He walked Eli to school. He scheduled a meeting with Eli's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, to catch up on everything he had missed: his son's progress in reading, his struggles in math, the small victories and setbacks that had been accumulating while Malcolm was buried in migration reports. He sat in a plastic chair in her classroom and listened to every word, and when she said Eli had been writing stories about a superhero dad who could stop time, Malcolm had to look away for a moment before he could speak. He cooked dinner, real dinner, not takeout, and they ate together at the kitchen table, and Eli talked about his friends, his basketball team, a girl named Jasmine who could run faster than anyone in the 5th grade. For 7 days, Malcolm felt like a father again. The second week was harder. The mornings were fine, but by noon, after Eli left for school, the house became a museum of silence. Malcolm cleaned, he organized closets, he fixed the leaking faucet in the bathroom that had been dripping for 6 months. He went for runs along the lakefront, long and aimless, the city moving around him, while he moved through it without purpose. He applied for 3 jobs, then closed his laptop without submitting any of them. He did not know what he wanted. The only thing he knew was what he did not want: the version of himself that came home too late to say goodnight, the version that checked emails during his son's games, the version that mistook exhaustion for dedication. But without that version, who was he? The question followed him through every quiet afternoon, every empty evening after Eli went to bed. Malcolm sat on the couch in the dark and realized that leaving NextGen had solved only half the equation. He had removed the thing that was destroying him, but he had not replaced it with anything. The space where his career had been was just space, open, undefined, and frightening in its vastness. One night in his 3rd week away from NextGen, Malcolm was putting Eli to bed when the boy looked up at him with an expression that was too old for a 10-year-old. "Dad, are you bored?" Malcolm almost laughed. "What makes you say that? You keep cleaning the same stuff? And you stare at your phone a lot." Malcolm sat on the edge of the bed. "I am figuring some things out. That is all." "Is it about work?" "It is about everything." Eli pulled the blanket up to his chin. "I like having you here," he said. "But I do not want you to be sad about it." After he closed Eli's door, Malcolm stood in the hallway with his back against the wall. His son, this 10-year-old boy who had spent years learning to read his father's moods the way other kids read comic books, had just told him the truth. No one else would say being present was not the same as being whole. Malcolm had left NextGen to stop running from his life. But now, standing in the silence of his own house, he wondered if he had simply run in a different direction. The rain started around 9 on a Thursday night, nearly 4 weeks after Malcolm's last day at NextGen. Not the kind of rain that whispers against windows, the kind that hammers thick and relentless, turning the streets into shallow rivers and the sky into something low and heavy. Eli was asleep. Malcolm was on the couch with a book he had read the same page of 4 times when the doorbell rang. He was not expecting anyone. His mother lived on the west side and never drove in weather like this. His neighbors kept to themselves. He set the book down and walked to the front door, turning on the porch light as he reached for the handle. Jessie Carter stood on his doorstep. Her coat was dark with rain, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, instead of pulled back the way he had seen it every day for 4 years. She was not wearing the heels she wore at work or the tailored jacket. She looked for the first time since Malcolm had known her like someone who had driven across the city without knowing what she would say when she arrived. Malcolm opened the door wider, but said nothing. The rain filled the silence between them, loud and steady. Jessie met his eyes. There was no rehearsal in her face, no strategy. "I still need you," she said. Malcolm looked at her for a long time. The rain soaked the welcome mat. The porch light threw shadows across her face. He thought about the emails, the board meetings, the Meridian integration still grinding forward without him. He thought about Terrence stepping into his role, about the transition documents he had left behind, about the clean and professional way Jessie had handled his departure. He stepped aside and let her in, and as she walked past him into the warmth of his house, Malcolm was certain of one thing: she was not here to talk about work. But he was not yet sure what she was here to say. Jessie stood in the middle of Malcolm's living room the way someone stands in a place they have never been, but have thought about, taking in the details quietly, as if confirming something she had only imagined. The basketball on the shelf by the door. The permission slips pinned to the refrigerator with magnets. The pair of small sneakers by the couch, one tipped on its side. Malcolm handed her a towel from the hallway closet. She took it and pressed it against her hair without sitting down. "I owe you an explanation," she said. Malcolm leaned against the kitchen counter and folded his arms. "You do not owe me anything, Jessie." "Yes, I do." She lowered the towel to her side. "I spent the last 2 weeks of your time at NextGen pretending you were just another employee leaving. I stopped calling. I stopped talking to you about anything that was not a deliverable or a handoff document. I told myself that was the professional thing to do." She looked at the floor, then back at him. "It was not professional. It was cowardice." Malcolm said nothing. He let her speak because he understood the way he had understood during those late-night calls that Jessie rarely allowed herself to be vulnerable, and right now she was standing in his living room with every wall down. "When you handed me that letter," she continued, "I thought I could handle it the way I handle everything. Process it, delegate the transition, move on. But that night I sat in my office until midnight, and I could not move. Not because of the Meridian deal, not because I was losing my best department head, because I was losing the only person in that building who ever talked to me like I was a human being." She set the towel on the back of a chair. "Everyone in that company sees a title when they look at me. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every interaction has an agenda. But you, during those calls, those nights when we talked about nothing and everything, you never wanted anything from me. You just listened. And I did not realize how much I needed that until it was gone." Malcolm felt the weight of her words settle into the room. He had spent the last 4 weeks convincing himself that those calls had meant more to him than to her, that he had imagined the intimacy that Jessie's silence during his final 2 weeks was proof that she had already moved on. Hearing her now dismantled that story completely. But he was careful. He had to be. "Why did you come tonight?" he asked. "Not 2 weeks ago, not on my last day. Tonight." Jessie moved to the window. The rain was still coming down hard, the streetlights blurred through the glass. "Because I have been doing the same thing you did, working until there is nothing left of me, going home to an empty apartment, telling myself that the company is enough." She turned to face him. "After you left, I started noticing what NextGen does to people, not just you, everyone. We have a turnover rate in senior leadership that is double the industry average. I pulled the data myself. We are burning through talent because we have built a culture that treats sacrifice as loyalty and exhaustion as commitment." Malcolm recognized the shift. This was Jessie, the strategist, the problem solver, the CEO, who turned insight into action. But beneath it was something personal she was building toward. "I created a new position," she said, "Vice President of Workforce Sustainability. The job is to redesign how we treat our people, scheduling mental health support, parental leave, workload architecture. All of it. I want to build a system where no one has to choose between being good at their job and being present in their own life." Malcolm studied her face. "And you want me to take it. I want you to consider it. But that is not why I am here." The room went still. Outside, the rain softened to something steady and low. "I am here because I need you to know that what happened between us, those conversations, that connection, it was not something I did as a CEO managing a valuable employee. It was something I did as a person who was drowning and did not know it." Her voice thinned, not with weakness, but with the effort of precision. "I need you, Malcolm. Not for the company. For me." Malcolm closed his eyes. He had imagined this moment in the quiet hours of the past few weeks, lying awake in the dark while the house settled around him. He had imagined what he would say, how he would respond, whether he would let himself feel what he had been holding back since those first late-night calls. But imagination was clean and simple, and this was neither. He opened his eyes and looked at the woman standing across from him. Jessie Carter, who ran a company worth more than $2 billion, who made decisions that affected 3,000 employees without flinching, who had driven across Chicago in a rainstorm to stand in the living room of a man who had walked away from everything she represented. "I need to be honest with you," Malcolm said. "When I left NextGen, I told myself I was choosing my son, choosing my life, and that was true. But I was also running from something I did not know how to name. Every night we talked, I felt closer to you than I had felt to anyone in years, and that terrified me because you were my CEO, and I could not separate what was real from what was convenient." He straightened up from the counter. "If I come back in any capacity, I need to know that the ground I am standing on is solid. I will not walk into a situation where the power between us is unclear. I will not let my son watch me disappear into that building again." And I will not pretend that what exists between us is just professional because we both know it is not. Jesse did not flinch. What do you need? Boundaries. Real ones. If I take this role, my hours are my hours. No exceptions that become the norm. No Tuesday and Thursday flexibility that erodes in 3 weeks. He was referencing his own failure, and they both knew it. And if we are going to explore what this is between us, whatever it is, it has to be transparent. Not hidden. Not something that lives in midnight phone calls. The board knows, HR knows, everyone knows. Because I am not going to be the story people whisper about in the break room. Jesse nodded slowly. I would not want that either. And I am not saying yes tonight, Malcolm added. I am saying I will think about it. Because the last time I made a major decision without thinking, I ended up in your office at 9 in the morning dropping a resignation letter on your desk. Something close to a smile crossed Jesse's face, the first one Malcolm had seen from her all evening. It was small, unguarded, and it changed the geometry of the room. Take whatever time you need, she said. She picked up the towel, folded it neatly, and set it on the counter. Then she walked to the door. Malcolm followed, and as she stepped onto the porch, the rain now lighter but still persistent, she turned back. For what it is worth, she said, you are the reason I pulled that turnover data. You are the reason that position exists. Not because I wanted to lure you back, but because watching you leave made me realize I was running a company that destroys the people it claims to value. I do not want to be that person anymore. Malcolm held the door open. That is worth a lot. She walked to her car. He watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, then closed the door and stood in the quiet of his house. The rain tapped against the windows. Down the hall, Eli slept undisturbed. Malcolm did not sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had packed lunches and reviewed migration reports and eaten cereal across from his son, and he thought about every choice that had led him here. The years of sacrifice. The engagement that collapsed under the weight of his absence. The job that gave him purpose while stealing everything else. The woman who had just stood in his living room and said the words he had been afraid to hear. He called Jesse 5 days later. He accepted the role Vice President of Workforce Sustainability at Next Gen Systems on his terms. Reduced hours, a team of his own, a mandate from the board, which Jesse had already secured, to fundamentally redesign how the company treated its people. Malcolm's first initiative was a flexible scheduling program for parents and caregivers built on the simple principle that no employee should have to choose between their career and their child's basketball game. The relationship between them was disclosed to the board within the first month. It was not a scandal. It was not a secret. It was two people who had chosen transparency over comfort, and while not everyone understood it, no one could question its honesty. Months later, on a Saturday afternoon, Malcolm stood in the kitchen of his house on the south side. Eli was at the table doing homework, a pencil behind his ear, his math workbook open to a page he was actually finishing. The faucet Malcolm had fixed during those aimless weeks no longer dripped. The refrigerator still had permission slips pinned to it, but next to them now was a photo Malcolm and Jesse at the company's annual gala, standing side by side not as CEO and employee, but as two people who had found each other by first finding themselves. Jesse came through the front door, carrying groceries, her hair down, no heels, no tailored jacket. Eli looked up and said, "Did you get the orange juice?" She held up the carton, and he nodded with the quiet satisfaction of a boy whose world had become finally predictable. Malcolm watched them from the counter. He thought about the man he had been a year ago, exhausted, breaking, convinced that success and happiness were opposite ends of a scale that only tipped one way. He thought about the letter on Jesse's desk, the silence of his last 2 weeks, the rain on a Thursday night. Sometimes the person who says, "I still need you," is not asking you to come back to what broke you. They are asking you to build something new together. But that only works when you have already decided that you will never lose yourself again. Malcolm had decided, and for the first time in a very long time, he was home. You know, Malcolm almost did not open that door. He almost let the rain answer for him. And honestly, most people would have. Because when you have finally found peace, the last thing you want is someone pulling you back toward the place that broke you. But here is what I keep thinking about. Jessie did not send an email. She did not schedule a meeting through HR. She drove across Chicago in a rainstorm and stood on his porch with nothing but the truth. That takes a kind of courage most people never find. So I want to ask you something, and I mean this. If someone you cared about showed up at your door and said, "I still need you," would you let them in? Or would you protect the peace you fought so hard to build? There is no wrong answer. Drop it in the comments because I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, if you have ever been Malcolm standing in that doorway, trying to figure out whether going back means losing yourself again, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories like this every week. Stories about real choices, real people, the kind of moments that change everything. I will see you in the next one.